Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. And so it's just kind of you're flipping through. It's only 5 chapters, so it's kind of that book that sometimes gets forgotten after Jeremiah. And that's where we're going to be tonight. And so I'm not going to have all of Lamentations chapter 1 on the screen for us this evening. I'm going to pick out a few verses as we go, but I'm going to spend some time and just kind of read through the chapter as well. And so if you want to stick your finger in or your thumb in just to kind of bookmark it, when we get to that point a little bit later on, then you can do that tonight. This is part 2 of our evening series on Lamentations, and so if you were with us last time, you'll know that we kind of introduced the whole theme of lament by talking about what led to lament, what led to the book of Lamentations being written, and we talked about the historical account of what happened in the life of the nation of Israel that brought us to this place. We went back even all the way starting with Abraham kind of quickly, caught us up to speed through the age of kings, starting with Saul, David, Solomon, and then the division of Israel into the 10 tribes in the north and the 2 tribes in the south. We talked about the Assyrian invasion from the north that eventually took Israel, and eventually the Babylonians who took over the Assyrians, these 2 world superpowers who rose to power at different times in history, and the Babylonians eventually attacking Judah and taking the city of Jerusalem and taking the southern kingdom of Israel into exile, and the kingdom essentially was no more. And that kind of find our place in that in the calendar around 587, 586 BC, if you like to have a date on it. Now, when we talked about what happened to the nation and it's being conquered and all of the rest, Lamentations is framed in light of God's covenant promise to his people. I'll be your God and you will be my people. But with the nation being completely and utterly destroyed, the questions that rise to the surface are what happened to God and his promises. And not only that, but what happened to God's people in the midst of it. You see, because the Babylonians had come, and especially in the southern kingdom, they had earlier on taken the best and the brightest citizens out of the country, the craftsmen, the scholars. There were thousands that were removed and taken to Babylon. And only as Jeremiah describes it, or as 2 Kings describes the story, only the poor of the poor were left in Judah. And not only that, but eventually the temple was burnt, looted, all of the things that the temple being the centerpiece of the presence of God, the worship, all of the law and the covenant, like all the pieces that were part of the ritual of Israel's worship was completely removed and destroyed. And not only that, but the city itself that once stood in that place. And so there's all kinds of devastation and destruction that has taken place. And Tim Mackey from the Bible Project says this about the book of Lamentations in particular. He says, the book of Lamentations is a memorial to the pain and confusion of the Israelites that followed this destruction. That's really what this book is. And so it's really uplifting stuff for us to kind of spend some time in over the next little bit. But tongue-in-cheek, of course, but I hope it's helpful for us. Now, last week we covered a little bit about what is a lament and why is it important. I just kind of want to go back and just bring a little bit more clarity to that, and perhaps for some of us to remind us or to kind of bring it to the surface for us. A lament, there's really kind of 3 things that we would identify that come with lament. First of all, a lament is in some senses a form of protest. It's a way of drawing attention to something. It doesn't necessarily mean with placards and marches, but it's a protest cry. It's a written protest, as it were, even toward God, to the horrible things that happen in this world that should not be tolerated. It's a protest. This is not right. It is not good. It is not healthy. It should not be tolerated by anyone. It's a form of protest. Secondly, a lament is not only that, because we could say, well, if lament is simply protest, then we haven't really done much lamenting. We've just kind of protested an injustice that has taken place or something that has gone wrong. A lament is also a way of helping us to process the emotion that we feel when things have gone wrong. It is a way of venting our anger, yes, and our dismay even perhaps, over the ruin that comes as a result of people's sin and selfishness. Because we see that happens. When there is sin, there is separation. Where there's selfishness, someone gets hurt. Where things go wrong, there are people who suffer as a result, and that raises all kinds of emotions for us. Perhaps anger or confusion or regret, or there's a whole host of things that might come. And so it's a way then of not simply venting, but processing through the emotion that we feel as a result of what's gone wrong in the midst of our protest. So it's a form of protest. It's a way to process, but it's also a way to voice confusion. It's not always neat and tidy. It's not always something that we come to and go, oh yes, well, we've got it all figured out. We're just going to kind of put it in a can, and here we are, a complete packaged product. Although Lamentations in some ways might feel like that because it is put all together, but we're going to see why even within its own structure as a book and as these 5 poems, there's a bit of chaos to it amidst the order and the structure. We'll get to that in a second. But it's a way to voice confusion. And confusion over what? Well, the confusion over the things that I've already kind of briefly introduced. It's asking questions about God's character and promises that come out of our own suffering. Because when we suffer, there's confusion sometimes. When we suffer, there's difficulty. When things go wrong, there's a sense in which we feel unstable. The ground is not always solid. What is it that we cling to and hold on to? And especially if we've relied on a way of seeing the world for so long that feels like that has just been completely upended, what do we do with that? It's a way to voice our confusion, and it's a way to do that in a place that is sacred and safe with God in the process. So what is Lamentations then? We haven't properly introduced the book. Lamentations is, I've said this already, but it's a collection of 5 lament poems, and it's divided into 5 chapters conveniently for us. And it happens after the fall of Jerusalem. So it's likely written not long after the events, the actual events that took place. So the memories of those events are very fresh and raw and new, and so it's not long after. The author of Lamentations is not identified. Many places in the scriptures we read, especially in the New Testament, this is the Apostle Paul with Silas and so, and we're writing to, and we know who it's from, we know who it's to. Lamentations doesn't give any of that kind of indication of authorship, although many speculate it probably is, and perhaps most likely is, the prophet Jeremiah, which is partly why it follows the book of Jeremiah, perhaps, though they are meant to go together. So many speculate it actually is Jeremiah, even though the author is unidentified. Lastly, I'll say this, is that it is written by a highly skilled poet, which is more evident in the original Hebrew, the language that it would have been written in, before it was translated into English and various other languages in between that. It is written by a highly skilled poet, and again, if you could read Hebrew, you would see how that's true, especially in poetry. You all remember poetry class in school? And maybe some of you who were glad to forget poetry class. In fact, one of Emma's classmates recently at school, I heard, came home and was complaining to their mother about poetry and them learning poetry in school. And it's like, why can't they just say what they want to say? Like, why does it have to be in all of these fancy, metaphors and allusions, and you have to kind of guess at what the meaning is? Why can't they just say what it is? And that's kind of, for some of you, maybe that's the case. Maybe that's where you land with it. I don't know. But the poetry here is quite stunning, and even the poetry itself, in terms of the way it's structured, says something to us or communicates something to us beyond just simply, I'm very sad and upset and confused. There's something to the method that is helpful for us. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, let me just kind of give you this. The first 4 chapters, there's 5 in total, the first 4 chapters of Lamentations are what we call an acrostic. Each poem is an acrostic, or what we would call an alphabet poem. And so, again, you don't get this in the English, but in the Hebrew, each stanza or each line starts with a consecutive letter of the alphabet. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and you'll notice in chapters 1, 2, and 4, there are 22 verses. So there's one of the indications we get. Chapter 3 has 66 verses, but conveniently, if you divide those by 3, you get 22, right? And so the 3 verses together start with one letter of the alphabet. And so if we did it in English, so in Hebrew it would be aleph, bet, gamma. In the English it would be A, B, C, D, right? You would start each line with one letter. So it's an alphabet poem. The pattern changes though in chapter 5, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But each poetic verse again starts with a different letter, and it has a very ordered and linear structure. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because it is set in contrast to the disorder and confusion caused by the pain and the grief that's been experienced. And so again, Tim Mackey says this about it. He says, it's almost like Israel's suffering is explored from A to Z, or A to Z, depending on how you learned it, trying to express something that is inexpressible. Trying to get through the whole thing, and how do we come to some understanding of what's happening from all the way from beginning to end. It's almost like that's what the author is trying to do. And so with this series, I feel like it would in some ways be inadequate to simply preach the text for us, because I don't know that that's necessarily what lament is intended to be. And so what I want to help us to do is learn to lament, even if it's simply to observe a lament that comes from the scriptures. And so here's what I want to do, at least for tonight. We'll see how it goes. We'll see what happens. We might not do this every time, but here's kind of the order and the structure. What I want to do first, there's 3 parts to it. First, I just want to simply read the whole chapter. All 22 verses, all at once. That's what I want to do. Read the whole thing. Why? So we can hear the lament poem as it is written, without kind of breaking it up and analyzing it from the get-go. So we're going to read through the whole chapter. Secondly, I'm going to make just a few observations of some of the themes or things that come to the surface out of the text. You might see some other things in there that I don't touch on, but I just want to share a few brief observations. So again, we won't spend a lot of time on that. And then thirdly, so I want to make some space at the end just for the possibility of personal lament, that we might pray into the themes that we have that we discover as we read through. Sound good? Okay. If not, that's my plan anyway, so here we go. Okay. So Lamentations, chapter 1. I'm reading from the ESV, the English Standard. If you have a different translation, that's fine. You'll see it's mostly probably going to be much the same. But here's Lamentations, chapter 1, the first lament that we have recorded. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow has she become, she who was great among the nations. She who was a princess among the provinces has become a slave. She weeps bitterly in the night with tears on her cheeks. Among all of her lovers, she has none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her, and they have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile because of affliction, a hard servitude. She dwells now among the nations, but finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for none come to the festival. All her gates are desolate, her priests groan, her virgins have been afflicted, and she herself suffers bitterly. Her foes have become the head, her enemies prosper, because the Lord has afflicted her for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children have gone away, captives before the foe. From the daughter of Zion, all her majesty has departed. Her princes have become like deer that find no pasture. They fled without strength before the pursuer. Jerusalem remembers in the days of her affliction and wandering all the precious things that were hers from days of old, when her people fell into the hand of the foe, and there was none to help her. Her foes gloated over her, and they mocked at her downfall. Jerusalem sinned grievously, therefore she became filthy, and all who honored her despise her, for they have seen her nakedness. She herself groans and turns her face away. Her uncleanliness was in her skirts. She took no thought of her future. Therefore her fall is terrible. She has no comforter. O Lord, behold my affliction, for the enemy has triumphed. The enemy has stretched out his hands over all her precious things, for she has seen the nations enter her sanctuary, those whom you forbade to enter your congregation. All her people groan, and they search for bread. They trade their treasures for food to revive their strength. Look, O Lord, and see, for I am despised. Is it nothing to you, all who pass by? Look and see if there is any sorrow like my sorrow, which was brought upon me, which the Lord inflicted on the day of his fierce anger. From on high he sent fire into my bones and made it descend. He spread a net for my feet and turned me back. He has left me stunned, faint all the day long. My transgressions were bound into a yoke. By his hand they were fastened together. They were set upon my neck. He caused my strength to fail. The Lord gave me into the hands of those whom I cannot withstand. The Lord rejected all my mighty men in my midst. He summoned an assembly against me to crush my young men. The Lord has trodden as in a winepress the virgin daughter of Judah. For all these things I weep. My eyes flow with tears, for a comforter is far from me, one to revive my spirit. My children are desolate, for the enemy has prevailed. Zion stretches out her hands, but there is none to comfort her. The Lord has commanded against Jacob that his neighbors should be his foes. Jerusalem has become a filthy thing among them. The Lord is in the right, for I have rebelled against his word. But hear, all you peoples, and see my suffering. My young men and my young men have gone into my young women and my young men have gone into captivity. I called to my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and elders perished in the city while they sought food to revive their strength. Look, O Lord, for I am in distress. My stomach churns. My heart is wrung within me, because I have been very rebellious. In the street the sword bereaves. In the house it is like death. And they heard my groaning, yet there is none to comfort me. All my enemies have heard of my trouble. They are glad that you have done it. You have brought the day you announced, and let them be as I am. Let all their evil doing come before you, and deal with them as you have dealt with me because of all of my transgressions. For my groans are many, and my heart is faint. Great devotional reading. It's a heavy piece, isn't it? There's a lot there. There's a lot of emotion that is expressed and felt. There's a lot that is to be lamented. And there are a number of themes that we find throughout this passage that rise to the surface. The first half of the lament describes, once again, the downfall of Jerusalem, but it does so from the third person perspective. And so Jerusalem is personified here. This takes you back to your English class and poetry. Jerusalem is personified as Lady Zion, also called Daughter of Zion. And what we see is, again, some of the imagery and language that is used kind of weaves together all of these pictures that help us be able to express the emotion that is felt, or to perhaps for us to feel the emotion that has been expressed by the author. And so what we see are some of these themes running through the verse and through the verses. And I think one of the first ones that comes right out of the beginning is the idea of loneliness. I mean, what a way to start the poem. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow she has become, she who was great among the nations, she who used to be so prominent. and so incredibly beautiful and valuable, she who is kind of a crown jewel, as it were, now sits lonely and empty and without her spouse, even it says, like a widow who has experienced deep loss. The person that she has spent her life with, the person that through the covenant of marriage, just to build on the metaphor, to the covenant of marriage and a lifetime together of children and grandchildren and of memories and places you've traveled and events you've been a part of, and all of the things and the joys of marriage are suddenly gone because a spouse has been lost. It's not, I guess, that the memories are gone, but that companion is no longer with you. And that is the sadness that is felt because of loneliness and of loss. The joy even of a community and of presence and of place just simply is no more. The people and the hustle and the bustle and the festivals and the times where you get together and everybody would kind of come together for the particular event or moment or thing that was happening, and there's a strong sense of community that was being felt, or the presence of other people, that even just of being in one another's company. And the place even of Jerusalem itself as being a place that is gathered. For many of us, there are specific places in our lives that bring back memories, and not just simply memories of things that happened, but the people that they happened with. And all of a sudden, there's a loneliness. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. And secondly, attached to that loneliness, and I think layered on top of the loneliness, brings a sense of sadness. The experience of sadness, and not only a heaviness but that comes with sadness, but almost a bitterness that comes in the sadness. It's not just that we are sad, but there's something behind that kind of gets under our skin, and if we're not careful, begins to take root. We see this in verse 2. It says, she weeps, but not only does she weep, but she weeps bitterly in the night, with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has none to comfort her. This is an allusion of the fact that all the treaties with other nations and all those who would have been part of her protection, politically, just are no more, have turned their back. And so that's the reference there, that is all her lovers, all those who swore allegiance and loyalty and protection, they have not come through. And so her experience on top of loneliness is sadness and bitterness, and it's heavy, and there's no one to bring comfort. And not only have her allies not showed up, but her allies have become her enemies. I think we talked about this a while ago, that the worst betrayals are not those of our enemies, but of our friends. And so there's this sense of not only loneliness, but sadness in the midst of all kinds of other loss. And then finally, one other thing in the first half, at least in verse 8, is the associated pain of shame that comes with it. It says in verse 8, Jerusalem sinned grievously. Therefore she became filthy, and all who honored her now despise her. Those who saw her as one to be honored is now been turned against. She has experienced shame because of guilt and because of sin. We talked about how God's people had begun to worship idols, how they had turned away from the law of the Lord. They had not fulfilled the covenant promises. And attached to that was kind of the blessings and curses that came with the covenant. If you remember that from Exodus, if you walk in my ways, if you follow my path, if you are obedient in righteousness, there was the promise then that there would be blessing as a result. But if you do not do these things, there will be consequence as a result, or curse even. It's referred to. And so there are blessings and curses that come with keeping the covenant of God. And what's experienced here now is the shame that is associated with sin. And so not only is it a loss of honor among the nations, but it is a very deep and spiritual loss, because she has abandoned her God. She has abandoned Yahweh. And so there's loneliness and sadness and shame experienced through all that has happened. So eventually she speaks, though. this personified city. She speaks, calling out to the Lord and asking him to notice all that the Israelites have experienced. We start to get pieces of this at the end of verse 9, where it says this, "O Lord, behold, look, pay attention." It's like you're standing in the street waving your arms. "Behold my affliction. The enemy has triumphed. Do you see what is happening?" It's that calling to attention. The end of verse 11, "Look, O Lord," similar to behold, pay attention and see. I am despised. Do you see my plight? Do you see me where I'm at? Do you see the things I'm walking through and experiencing? Do you see what has happened to me? Do you see even into my heart and how I feel about these things? There's a calling to attention. And then in the second half of the chapter, we see this individual lament now becomes a place of first-person lament. And there's two things I'll mention that I noticed that come out of it. Again, you might see all kinds of other things, but the first comes in verse 18. And it's an admission on her part. What is the admission? The admission is that the Lord is in the right. That God is not unjust. What God has done as a result of my sin or as a consequence of my sin or what he said would happen has actually come to pass. And it's not, I have no place to respond to God in judgment to say that's unfair or you did me wrong. It's that the Lord is in the right. Why? Because I have rebelled against his word. God has been true to his word and what he would say, what he said he would do, where I have not been true to my word in saying that I would do what I promised I would do. My love and loyalty to God and for them as a nation, I have turned away from it. And yet God is faithful to his covenant promise that if there's not the responsibility that's held up by his people, he would follow through on judgment, and that's what's coming to pass. And so the response is, hey, the Lord is in the right. There's nothing I have to say. There's no argument that I can give that would put him in the wrong, because I am the one who's rebelled against his word. There's an admission that takes place, but also then in verse 20, you see how the language begins to shift a little bit, and it says this, "Look, O Lord, for I am in distress. My stomach churns. My heart is wrung within me." You've probably experienced that before in some moment of your life. I know I have. The distress that's felt over, pick a thing, whether it's our own sin, whether it's circumstances, where it's some injustice, whatever it might be, we feel the weight of distress and the turning of your stomach, and your heart just kind of feels like it's being wrung out. It's almost like there's a trauma associated with what's taking place. And with that trauma comes this overwhelm that floods the system, and the individual is unable to cope with what's happening. It's described in verse 15, just a little bit earlier. Here's a very vivid image for us. It says, "The Lord has trodden as in a wine press." You know, wine presses work. There's grapes put into, in ancient days, put into this kind of circular vat, and sometimes there would be a heavy stone that would be rolled around it, and it would squish and crush the grapes so that all the juice would run out the bottom. Sometimes people would stand and they would use their feet and they would crush the grapes, and you want to make sure you had clean feet if you were doing that, I'm sure, But it's this pressing under pressure that kind of squeezes out the juice inside. And the idea is, I feel like that's how I've been dealt with. Just completely crushed down, pushed, pressured. And there's this sense of overwhelm that comes with it. And the experience, and as a whole even, of Lamentations is really much like a funeral, where we're mourning the death of a loved one without any sense of comfort. It's just absolutely disorienting. Something significant has been lost. What once was is no longer. The feelings of loneliness and sadness and shame and trauma are real. And in chapter 1, what happens? Well, the author, whoever it may be, has in an orderly way tried to explore that theme and those feelings from beginning to end to make some sense out of it. And there's simply this is simply a way of trying to bring it all to God's attention. Not because God is unaware and does not know, but because it is helpful to do it. It is good for us to do it. Why? There's a moment of sheer honesty in this text. It's without excuse. God is in the right. I have clearly done what is wrong. There's no silver linings offered here. Well, things will chin up. Things will get better. Don't need to feel lonely. You don't need to feel sad. There's no sense in wallowing in shame. Trauma is just a psychological word that we use to try to do that. Like, don't worry about it. Things will get better. There's a silver lining in this somewhere. There's got to be. Babylon must have great restaurants. That's none of that is here. It's just no holding back with really no resolution. It's a pouring out of the heart toward God in the present circumstances of all that's been lost. And so for tonight, I don't know where this might resonate with you or kind of the season of life you're in, and maybe for you right now, it'd be hard to find something, but maybe for you, it's like, I feel like I'm right in the thick of it. What I want to do is give you the space to simply do this, to bring it to God's attention. Again, not because he doesn't know, but because it's helpful for us to do so. To draw attention, whether for yourself or for someone else, the loneliness, the sadness, the shame, the trauma, to give you permission to simply bring it to the Lord and to say, this is what's happening. This is where I'm at. This is the emotion that I feel. This is the confusion. This is the space that is so disorienting. I'm so lonely. My tears have been my food, as the psalmist says. To just bring it all before the Lord and to simply ask God, what do I do with it?